there's really one specific job that is concerned with protecting your reputation, and that is communications. So, two things that I would recommend people do to start prepping, if they do nothing else: create a core crisis team and put a communications person on your leadership team, because not only can they help you understand what to do in a crisis, they can help you spot a crisis.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change.
Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. There are some people who walk into chaos and somehow make everyone else feel calmer. Stephanie Craig is one of those people. Known to many as the Olivia Pope of crisis communications, minus the couture wardrobe, Stephanie has built a career helping leaders navigate the kind of moments that can make or break a business. But her story starts far from boardrooms and newsrooms. She was born in the Canadian Arctic, raised by a Mountie, surrounded by snow, wolves and wild frontiers. It was there, moving from one remote post to another, that she learned how to read people fast, adapt quickly and stay steady when things went wrong. All traits that one day would make her one of the most trusted voices in crisis leadership. Stephanie has worked across both the US and Canadian Houses and Senates, led communications through political storms, and today heads Kith, a crisis management firm that helps global brands prepare before disaster strikes. In this conversation, we talk about what really happens in the first 24 hours of a crisis, why clarity and trust equal strategic speed, and how a well-prepared leader can turn panic into purpose. We also explore the human side of it all, the calm under pressure, the sleepless nights, and the power of self-awareness when the world seems to be spinning. Please enjoy my conversation with the brilliant, unflappable, and very human Stephanie Craig. Hello, Stephanie. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you today?
Wonderful, Sadhna. Thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you.
I am too. We've had this super long conversation even before we've started. So I'm really looking forward to our chat today because I don't think we'll have a problem connecting. But now I'm going to start from the very beginning. You were born in the Canadian Arctic and raised by a Mountie. Now, the thought of being born surrounded by snow, I've only ever seen it on TV shows, etc. I don't even know how anyone survives that, but you clearly did. Tell us more about what it was like growing up in the Canadian Arctic, raised by a Mountie.
Well, so the Mounties are a lot like the military. My parents were an interesting pair. My mom was from Southern Ontario. My dad was from Saskatchewan, and they met in Vancouver. And so then they got married. My dad said, well, we're moving to the Yukon. Okay. And she went, all right, okay. And their stories, along with their love story, was epic. They just had the most wonderful stories. And I came along in the Yukon, which we were there a couple of years ago, and I highly recommend. It is one of the last really truly untouched places in the world. The people are so warm, so lovely, and it is wilderness. I am not an outdoorsy girl. I do actually possess one of those t-shirts that says I'm outdoorsy. I drink on patio. Just a beautiful place. But then we moved north from there to a place right on the Arctic Circle where I lived until I was about 4. And then we moved down to Manitoba and then almost back up to the Arctic again in north. The Canadian provinces are the area of Canadian provinces are just so large. So in one province, you have very, very southern, right near the US border, all the way up to the Arctic in just one province. And it was just a wild way to grow up in, especially being here in the US in the capital. And I will tell stories, which is like, oh, we had to stay after school because wolves were in town. And people look at me like I've lost my mind. And if I don't preface that by saying I grew up in the Arctic, I can get some really, really good looks. But there's a number of things that I think I take from that is, one, when you move in schools so many times, and I'm an only child, so I was on my own, learn really fast how to figure out what make people tick, how to get to know them, the ones you shouldn't know and the ones that don't outwardly look like the people you should know, but you want to get to know them anyway. So you become a really quick judge of character and a really quick, I guess, evaluation of situations. And that's something that you don't really realize you're getting as you go from school to school. And then adaptation of culture. I've been so, so fortunate to just be in so many different types of culture, so many different geographies, which has made me very adaptable. I think the thing that applies to what I do now is my mom used to say that I've been part of every kind of natural disaster except a tsunami.
Well, you
And
don't
I
want to be
have
in one of those.
I was gonna say I have no desire to cross that one off the list. And so, my both my parents were incredibly calm under pressure. My grandparents were calm under pressure. And so I come of this very, very naturally. I chose a much safer route to exercise my adrenaline junkiness. But I just the growing up in the way I did in such a unique and quite honestly foreign in some ways because I didn't see a television until I was nearly 5 years old, and just things that aren't influencing to like even people our age, that the first time I saw a television I was most interested in the news.
Yeah.
And it could have been because the weatherman's name was Garth Dolly and the Dollies were good, but I from the time I was 5 years old I wanted to be involved in the news, and now I am involved in the part of preventing people from getting to the news.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because you went from that wonderful experience of growing up, which, clearly shaped your values and the view of the world, and you moved into working for both the US and Canadian houses and senates. What took you down that path?
Actually a natural disaster. So I'd gone to school in the University of North Dakota with full plans on being a journalist.
Mm.
And I was set to graduate, on track to graduate in May of 1997. And a 500-year flood hit the university, hit the town, and we were evacuated. And I was out at my sorority sister's grandmother's house, and she walked in and she shook my foot and she said, "Hey, Steph, Grand Forks is flooded, university's canceled, and congratulations, you just graduated."
Oh, wow. That's, that's one way of getting the news.
Absolutely. And so, but just because of geography, the river that was flooding was actually flowing north into
Mm.
Canada and right near the city where my parents were living. So I basically followed the flood home. And we evacuated, so we didn't have any stuff. And I hadn't officially graduated despite the, assurance from my sorority sister. And my mom, I lasted about 3 days, I think, watching the news of not only did Grand Forks flood, it then burnt down to the
Mm.
water level. It's something to look up if anybody is interested. But she said, you're driving me insane. There's a federal election going on. Figure out which party you belong to and go work. So it was kind of a,
The start.
yeah, it was just my mom getting mad at me saying, "Hey, you're making me crazy. There's an election going on and go figure it out." And so I
Mm.
had just the great pleasure of I figured out I was, a member of one particular ideology and joined that party and started knocking doors like all 21-year-old political people do in the US and Canada. And people were so mad because as most during in a parliamentary system, you can call an election whenever you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the fact that the prime minister had called an election during a flood, people were very angry. And I just kept, knocking doors and knocking doors. And one day I'm sitting there and someone comes up to me, one of the big wigs I didn't think knew my name. and said, "Hey, Stephanie, why are people calling our office to offer you clothes?" And I said, "Well, they were mad at me. So I just kept telling them I understood what they were feeling because I used to live in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And they felt bad after that." And he goes, "Oh, you're so doing the wrong thing." And so that was the kind of start into politics. I ended up doing some prime minister's advance and some ministerial advance and some of the work with some of the best crisis managers that I could ever ask for. And so it was a smart aleck comment by my mom, and off we went.
But you've also been called the Olivia Pope of crisis comms.
Yes.
How does that title sit with you? Because we all know the character Olivia Pope from the show Scandal, which was a great show. But how does that title sit with you?
I wish I had her shoes. Let's start
Yeah,
there.
I know.
Don't have those shoes. I think it's a wonderful show. Kerry Washington's a fantastic actress, but I really had to take a hard look when I took over my firm. What do we do? What do we really do? And if we do our job right, nobody knows that anything ever happened. And so a huge compliment to be called the Olivia Pope. And I do know how to handle a good crisis, but we would actually prefer if people worked with us before.
Before the crisis happened.
Absolutely. After that show, there was a huge increase in people that said they did crisis management. And one of the things that is really interesting when you move from politics, as you said, I worked in the Canadian House and Senate and the US House and Senate. And one of the things that is very different when you work in, and I should add that I worked on a bunch of political campaigns as well. And so when you move from that, corporate America doesn't have the same, I should say, place the same importance on communication functions as politics does.
Why is
So
that?
this, I have no idea. Maybe it's a political person's brand is that much more important. Speaking to their constituents is important. But it's really interesting to me because when you are a communications person in politics, you are involved in almost every decision that happens. And then folks move off and they're sometimes the last to know, even though they're trained to spot the crisis. And so we took a hard look at what we do. Turns out we're not really communications people anymore. We're management consultants because we're sitting there and we're helping people figure out how they can prevent crisis. And if they can't prevent it, how they can mitigate it.
Yeah.
And that was a big mental and shift for me to think about, because I always thought of myself as, well, I'm a communications person, right? I'm a press secretary. I'm CJ Craig from West Wing. It's what I do. Turns out I'm not what I thought I was.
Let's talk about that crisis management piece, particularly
Yeah.
in businesses. So, and I would imagine that the first few hours when a crisis hits is the most critical for a business. So from a board or CEO perspective, what should the leaders be doing when the crisis or any crisis first breaks, apart from calling you?
Yeah. Well, the first thing they should have done is they should have acted a few months in advance. And the reason I say that is there are a bunch of decisions that need to be made that don't have to be made at the time of a crisis. Because you always hear when folks, something's happened and you need to be fast. Well, fast without a plan is dangerous. You need to know things like who are going to be your spokespeople? What is your message? Do you know all the facts? Do you know who your constituents are? And I say that for a very particular reason. Most people think that, when you have a crisis, you need to put it on Twitter and Facebook and you need to talk to the media. If your constituents are of a certain age, older, younger, more conservative, more liberal, whatever you're thinking of, they may not be where you're talking. If you have a blanket if you just think it's a blanket way to communicate with them. And one of the other things that people can do beforehand is they need to figure out who matters to them. And so we have a formula that we use, and it's called clarity plus trust equals strategic speed. Not the willy-nilly, I need to be fast and I don't have all the facts and I don't know who my spokesperson is and I don't know what our next steps are. Strategic speed. So clarity and the clarity and the trust are things that happen beforehand. Clarity. What matters to you? As a leader, as an organization, what are your values? Those should guide you in a crisis. That understanding your values and what matters to you helps guide you in a crisis. So first one, under clarity, what matters to you? Second one, Who matters to you? Who are your stakeholders? Are they your board? Your board can be a stakeholder as well as an active participant. Are your employees your stakeholders? Are your customers your stakeholders? Do those customers have common traits? Do they get their information from the same place? Understanding who matters to you also helps guide you in responding to a crisis. And then the last part of clarity is who matters to them. In our society now, people get information from everywhere.
Everywhere.
And a lot of it is dictated by your peer group. I don't want to quote the actual number because I'm going to get it wrong, but a study came out last week saying that there's a very striking number of people under the age of 30 that trust what they get on TikTok, trust the medical information they get on TikTok more than the information they get from their doctor.
That's
So
crazy.
if you are recalling a medicine, who are you going to go to if that medicine is directed to people under 30? Understanding who they trust. So what you value, who you value, and who your stakeholders value. So that's clarity. Clarity on those things, plus trust. Trust in the people, the policies, and the procedures that you've put in place are going to work in the moment. So chain of command. Who notifies whom? Who is the spokesperson? Who is in charge of making sure that all of our I's are dotted and all of our T's are crossed? The policies. It's a ransomware attack. Do you have ransomware insurance? What does it say? We were working with a company, a global mining company, really wonderful CEO who was always the first person at the training. And I just happened to ask an offhanded question of the head of IT. I said, what's your ransomware insurance say? And he looked at me and he's like, I don't know. And I said, well, do you know if you're allowed to speak if you are in a ransomware attack? I don't know. Well, do you pay? Well, yes. I said, well, is that what your insurance says? And you could see the steam coming out of the CEO's ears because he was like, how do we not know
it? Yeah. How do we not
and
know this?
types of things that you can't ask. And then in a crisis, but then here's the other thing. They operated in 38 countries. So what are the regulatory requirements in those 38 countries? So finding that information, those policies, those procedures, and what is your policy on speaking? Who speaks? What do you say? Would you wait till you have all the information? Do you wait till you know what your next steps are going to be? I think you should probably know that beforehand. So when it is time to speak, you have all that information at hand. So clarity plus trust equals that strategic speed. And the first thing I think leaders can do is create a core crisis team. And it's usually 6 to 8 people. And each of them have to have the characteristic of they can make a decision and have subject matter expertise. So usually it's a communications person, an IT person, a lawyer, probably your financial person. And then depending on your business, fill out those other seats. You notice I didn't say CEO.
No, you didn't. I was just going to ask you that question.
It depends on your environment. We had a client that's an academic institution, and their president had such an outsized influence on discussions that if she were part of the group, she wouldn't get an accurate and truthful recommendation. So we worked it out with her that the group would meet and they would come up with 2 unanimous recommendations. And then she would have the choice between the recommendations because she would have swayed them far too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you have but on the flip side, the mining company, that CEO was very involved in collaborative. He would absolutely be sitting there because he had a collaborative spirit. You really have to look at how your own organization operates, but nothing changes of the clarity and the trust equals strategic speed.
What do you see in all the experience that you've had? What's the biggest mistake leaders make in the first 24 hours of a crisis?
Not gathering enough information and not talking to the right people. You have to understand what your decisions, what your comments, what effects they will have. And you have to game that out. You don't think you have time. And let me preface this by saying, if it is a life-threatening emergency, there's a hierarchy to this. You deal with the life-threatening things. It is necessary. And so if there's a need to communicate, say you've had a widget factory malfunction, that dictates who and how you communicate. So my widget factory has broken down, it means my customers are not going to get their shipments. Those customers cannot hear that from the news. My employees can't come to work tomorrow. Are we going to pay them or are we not going to pay them? You should have made that decision beforehand, but if you didn't, you got to make that decision and you got to let them know because they can't hear it from the news. So you have to make these decisions and understand how one affects another. And that is really something that people don't take into consideration.
It's scenario planning, isn't it, really, for the
It is.
leaders in all businesses to say, this is what my business does. What are the 3 or 4 things that might impact it at any one point in time? And let's scenario plan for that.
Absolutely. And we call it the ripple effect. What if I do this? It's almost like choose your own adventure. Remember those books when we were kids, the choose your own adventure books? If I do this, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. We do this exercise with some of our clients. You would be amazed. Once you get to the 5th ripple out, they all of a sudden go, oh, wait, that is not a good option. And so it's very much I think for leaders, the number one thing I would say leaders need to do, because you hit it on the head, scenario planning is important. It is. Understanding those things that I told you contribute directly to scenario planning. But the number one thing they need to do is recognize that something bad will happen to them. It is not something that we as human beings like to think about, but we call that mature leadership. Mature leadership is looking at what can harm you and addressing it, funding it, leading it, staffing it, figuring out how, because something bad is going to happen. Your goal is to make it less painful.
What's your advice for brands when they have to balance out brand equity in the marketplace? Because when something brand bad happens, it may or may not impact your brand, but if it's going to impact your brand negatively, how do you advise brands to manage that?
Let me back up for 1 second. So when folks think about their brands, it is now commonplace for people to value a brand. And let me also need to back further than that in 1 second. We like to call it a reputation. A reputation is 35% of an organization's value. 35%.
That's a lot.
Absolutely. And so thinking about how you protect it is very important. But let me make a distinction here between brand and reputation. Brand is something you pay for. It is your marketing. It is your spokes squirrel. It is your colors. Reputation is what other people think of you. And your reputation is what's valuable. And so as you think about what the marketplace looks like, this is where mitigation comes in and why building these systems are important, because brands are going to be negatively impacted by a long tail crisis. And this is something that folks don't think about. They differentiate. A reputation crisis is not the same thing as a real crisis. Well, a real crisis has a reputation effect. So thinking about it like that is very, very important for leaders to build in the right criteria. And while I am no longer a communicator, I am a huge advocate for communicators, and you should have a communicator at your leadership table. And the number one example of that not happening and then it having disastrous effects, Silicon Valley Bank. If there had been a communication person in that room, so before everyone started pulling their money out, the CEO sent an email.
But just to sort of, a lot of our listeners are Australian listeners, so tell us what happened there.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right.
I thought the Silicon Valley Bank was a universal thing.
Oh, it probably was, but I missed it. So tell
not a problem. I'm so sorry. I just got on a roll, and you need to wind me back, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So basically, this must have been 2 years ago. I don't want to I want to be careful with my terms because it's financial, and that is not my expertise. There was a rumor had started to circulate that there was a liquidity problem with the Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank was where all the big tech people banked. And the rumor persisted and the rumor persisted. So the CEO, in his wisdom, decided to communicate with his depositors. And what he communicated didn't help. It actually hurt. So people started pulling their money out. Thankfully for the bank and all of their non-super wealthy depositors, the federal government stepped in. I think Bank of America bought them, but I'm not sure. So everyone's money was safe. And so basically, whatever the CEO had communicated to their depositors scared them enough that they were taking their money out. And if you had had a communications person sitting at that table,
It would have been very
they could have
different.
said, what does that look like to these people? Because you have bankers talking to tech people, they don't speak the same language. And also, when you are in an organization, there's really one specific job that is concerned with protecting your reputation, and that is communications. So, two things that I would recommend people do to start prepping for, if they do nothing else, create a core crisis team and put a communications person on your leadership team, because not only can they help you understand what to do in a crisis, they can help you spot a crisis and say, hey, marketing, I know that sounds like a really good idea, but here's how that can go wrong. As long as you know what's going to go wrong and you still make the decision to go ahead, that's on you. But let me tell you how that can go wrong.
So in a world where everything is so digital, and I guess going back, I was thinking as you were telling me the example of the bank, in a world where, and you mentioned TikTok earlier, where there is so much technology available and that sort of misinformation heavy world happens so easily, how would you advise clients to either get ahead of the narrative or control the narrative, particularly, if it's a terrible rumor that's been started and it's happened online and it starts to spread out?
It depends on who it is and if it's true. Misinformation is quite honestly something you can't communicate yourself out of. Somebody has an agenda and they're spreading misinformation. That's not something you can really communicate yourself out of. Find some professional help, and that is not me.
Yeah.
I can recommend some people, but that is not me. So that is one thing. Something that folks really need to understand is that just having a statement, emailing it to reporters, and relying on news media to get it out is not the only way. Back to the stakeholders. You need to know who your stakeholders are and how they communicate. And really good example for that, one of our clients was a government contractor here in the US. They employ a ton of military veterans. And it just so happened that on one weekend, the payday ended up on November 11th weekend. So in Canada, we called it Remembrance Day. I'm not sure what y'all call it in
Same
Australia.
here. Yeah.
So Remembrance Day weekend. And they get a call from their payroll provider on the Thursday before the Remembrance Day weekend, long weekend, that the payroll provider's not going to be able to deliver payroll.
Oh.
So these veterans are not going to get paid on time during the weekend, that they're going to be revered. But these folks had done their work. They understood that no matter what, their people were their most important asset. Their people were their ambassadors to their clients. They were ambassador for recruitment. They were ambassadors for everything. So no matter what, they were going to make them right. They'd put aside the money in case anything ever happened, and they knew what they were going to do. So they also knew that their employees had a very unique way of communicating. You could communicate with them via email, but they only trusted you to come back with information by phone. And so what they ended up doing is they sent an email that said, this is what happened. So they were very frank and upfront with their customers, or pardon me, their stakeholders, and said, this is what's happened. And we can tell you that if anybody doesn't think they can make it through the weekend, we will help. Here's a 1-800 number, call us. So there's that understanding of how they communicate. Yeah. They were fully prepared for the email. Like if you email more than 3 people, fully prepare for it to be shared. And so they fully expected it to show up on LinkedIn or somewhere else, Facebook, but they said, we will help you. So we can go through, I think 8 people out of 4,600 employees took advantage of it. Well, fast forward 3 months. 3 months later, employee satisfaction has gone up. Employee retention has gone up. And employee recruitment had gone up. Customer satisfaction also went up. Simply because they understood their stakeholders. If you have, like I mentioned earlier with young people on TikTok, if you are trying to get information, health information in particular, to someone under the age of 30, we've just been told that you better be using TikTok. If you have Costco, for instance, are you familiar with Costco?
Yeah, yeah.
So Costco recently had a recall in the United States. They put it out on social media, they put it out to the media, and they called every single one of the customers that they knew had bought that product because they knew the product was going to be bought by older people. So understand, like, we can think about all of these different mediums as very scary in a crisis, but that understanding, you have to understand how your people want to be communicated to. There's a fast food hamburger chain in the US called Five Guys. They make pretty decent hamburgers, a little salty for my hand, but I doesn't stop me from getting them. But somebody, this was last summer, for one hamburger, a small fry and a pop, it was something like $25. And they posted their receipt to Twitter/X. And Five Guys did nothing. They never responded for comment. They never did anything. They didn't say sorry. They didn't, because they knew their customers didn't care. They knew their customers were paying, and it blew over.
So knowing when to react to something is also as critically important.
Well, and they knew they didn't need to react because they knew their people. So, like I sound a bit like a broken record, but these are really fundamental for a reason. And when something like an expensive receipt shows up on X, if you know your people and that's not going to matter to them, why respond?
Yeah, yeah. You'll just make it worse if you do sometimes. You talk about your crisis of the month prompts. Tell us more about that.
Sure. So this goes back to a philosophy we had is we love the scenario planning. We love people doing simulations, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. You, in your staff meeting, depending on what kind of organization you have, you can hold up your industry publication. You can hold up your tablet with the industry publication and just say, what would we do if this happened to us? Crisis of the month makes it easier for folks. So once a month, we will break down a scenario, real life has happened crisis, and we will give you 3 questions to ask at your staff meeting, and then 3 pieces of information that you can use as just some expert guidance. And it's free, and it will always be free. Part of our name of Kith is as in kith and kin, is we believe in being generous with the things we do. We love our clients, but there's so much in the world that you can give. And so this will always be free. And it's very simple to find. It's on our website, kith.co. And I highly recommend people to sign up. And quite honestly, if you have some ideas for some crisis for us to feature, we'd love it. They tend to be probably European and American focused. We'd always love an Australian one.
Australian crisis. So we'll probably give you a few. So what motivated you to start up the business, Kith?
Well, actually, I'm taking it over. So our founder, we actually worked together a long time ago at a different firm. And it took kind of political nomads like us and pointed us in a direction and said, hey, do what you do for corporations. And when that company went away, Bill started his own company. And as he transitions out, I had my own little firm where I counted some clients, but my 2 biggest clients I actually talk about. One is the former mayor of San Jose, California, so large city mayor now in Congress, and one is former First Lady Rosalind Carter. So those were kind of heartfelt clients. But Bill came over to me and said, "Hey, come and run this firm." And I thought, absolutely. And it's been fun because it's given me an opportunity to explore more the management side, to come up with the real thinking about this.
What's been the most out there crisis that you've managed?
Some of them tend to be very out there. We've dealt with clients that have had their industrial incident on the cover of 800 international newspapers. And we have dealt with very tiny little internal crises for small institutional organizations. Every once in a while, we'll do personal crises and work with some of our favorite lawyers to help folks. I'm trying to think of the most, I'm very careful on what I say.
Yes, I can.
And because our number one kind of philosophy is that we're discreet because we like to be able to handle things and have the least amount of damage. And if you call us before it happens, you don't end up on the cover of 800 newspapers.
800 magazines. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the
Um,
best advice you can give to businesses managing
uh,
a crisis,
if
no
you are
matter
a large,
how big or small?
if you are a large organization, start doing some major look at your infrastructure. If you're a small organization that wants to grow, start putting the policies in place now. So as you grow, this is front of mind that you're building an organization that is crisis resilient. And then if you always want to be small, just think about like you said, think about the top 3 worst things that could happen to you. And what are you doing to make sure that, they don't happen? And if they do, are you ready for them to happen? And it's just being mindful. And I think that's the biggest, if you tie all 3 of those together, the biggest thing is be mindful, be
Mm.
very mindful of just not worrying constantly, but thinking of the things that can happen and then preparing for them. Be a Boy Scout, be prepared.
I'm intrigued to know, do you think that given how fast we're moving in terms of technology, that we are going to get more crisis situations in business purely because of businesses are not really prepared for how fast the world of technology, hybrid world of work, there's so many things that are changing currently. Businesses are not fully prepared for the changes?
I think 2 things are going to happen. I think that audiences are becoming more and more bifurcated. You are getting smaller and smaller subsets of communities that pay attention to certain media. So that focus on your stakeholders and find them is important. I also think the regulatory is Andy Groves, one of the founders of Intel, used to say that business runs at 3 times the pace of government and technology runs at 3 times the pace of business. So therefore technology runs at 9 times the pace of government.
Mm-hmm.
So as government try globally, and I think this isn't a universal, as government tries to keep up with these fast changes, specifically AI, they're trying to wrap their arms around it, but it changes so fast that I think there's going to be the regulatory hurdles are going to have to be much bigger of a concern. And then also, I just wrote a column on this government relations. If you are a large organization, employ it. If you're a small organization, join an organization that represents your business because you have to understand what's happening and how it's going to affect you. I think in the US, one thing we're really looking at is tariffs and how are those tariffs. We understand how they're affecting the automobile industry and it's going to add X number of dollars to the cost of a car. How does it affect somebody? I'm trying to think of somebody just in my local neighborhood, stationery store going to affect you? Do you have someone advocating for you? Thinking through the tangential things that can come at you are important because the world in which we think about it, the 6 o'clock news,
It's not where you
it's
should be getting your information.
I would love for it to be. I love local news. I think local news is tremendously important because nobody else cares about, the water purity in your backyard. But it's the reality is that's not where people are getting a lot of their news. And I'm an absolute believer in a free press, but they have to be able to operate. And so it's becoming less and less and less. And I'm so thrilled that some folks are really trying to figure out how to make it work. But where people get their information is changing and it's changing fast. And
Mm.
again, you need to understand where your stakeholders are getting theirs because that
So,
matters.
so we've come to the point in our conversation where we ask our 4 standard questions of every guest that we have. And I'm intrigued to hear what you think the future of leadership looks like. So if you could describe a future fit leader in 3 words, someone that we'll need or the type of leader we'll need in the years ahead, what would they be and why?
Self-aware, collaborative, and cognizant.
So why those 3?
My experience has told me that the least self-aware amongst leaders are the ones that get themselves into the biggest problems.
That's no surprise, really, isn't it? Is it?
And collaborative because there's so much richness in conversations with people from different perspectives, different levels within your organization, different backgrounds. There's so much richness, and business problems cannot be handled from one perspective. The world is too interconnected. As you mentioned, communications are too fast and cognizant. You need to be cognizant of the world around you. You cannot, as a leader, you cannot be tone deaf when it comes to the people that matter to your business. Because quite frankly, the people that hold your reputation can make or break your business. They can make or break your leadership as well. Because boards are very much paying attention to value of reputation, crisis management. They see your reputation, 35% of your value going out the window. Your job is not safe.
What's the one shift coming in the next few years that you think most leaders are underestimating or not prepared for?
I think it's stakeholder engagement. I have a draft column that I'm writing that with the title of "If you hire one person this year, make it stakeholder engagement." Because of what we've talked about a few times, the bifurcation of media, the multiple channels of information. You have to know who your stakeholders are. You have to, because if you don't know who they are, you're never going to create stickiness with them. And that stickiness, I forgot to mention this earlier, that stickiness of your stakeholders, when a crisis happens, they will give you the benefit of the doubt because they know you and they trust you. That Five Guys example I gave earlier, their constituents knew them. They knew they got a great hamburger. They didn't care what it cost.
Yeah, it's a very good point. What do you wish more leaders were paying closer attention to?
I thought about this, but our conversation, of course, has changed my thinking. I would love to say I wish they thought more about crisis planning. I do wish that, of course. I really want to see a broad spectrum of backgrounds and philosophies represented around a table. It makes every decision better.
The diversity in it makes it much better.
Absolutely.
What are the possibilities or shifts you see in the future of leadership or work that really excites you, and why?
I think it's the dynamism of upcoming leaders. You're seeing in so many different organizations people's interest and investment in thinking about things differently. I've had such a great opportunity to spend a lot of time in the tech industry, and I feel like that idea of building and trying and failing fast, I think that's permeating a lot of industries, and I love that.
And my last one to you is, if you could embed one leadership quality into every current and future CEO, what would it be and why?
I'm going to go back to my first one, self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Stephanie, thank you for joining us all the way from DC and sharing your insights into how to manage a crisis and telling us some interesting stories of some of the crises that you have managed or been across. I really appreciate you taking the time to joining us today.
Oh, Sana, thank you so much for having me. It was just such a joy to meet you.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast, and don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.